My name is John Scott, and I was born in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I was born in July of 1951. Well, my father is Dr. Ralph Scott. He grew up a little bit across the country, but graduated from high school in Alma. Went to World War II and was in the Navy, was a CB. And then when he returned after the war, he went to Arkansas Tech. While he was there, he met my mother, who had grown up in Fort Smith. And they were married his last year at Tech. And then he took a job in Augusta, Arkansas, an assistant coach for Coach J.T. King and science teacher. Taught there 1 year. That summer I was born, while he was in graduate school at the university in Fayetteville. And then that fall we moved to Monett, Missouri, where we lived for 3 years. He was a coach there and taught science in the high school and the junior college. And then we moved to St. Louis, a suburb, Brentwood, for a year. And my parents did not like city life, so we moved to Huckabee, Missouri, small town in southeast Missouri. By that time I had a baby brother 2 years younger than me, and pretty soon I had a baby sister. And then in 1957 we moved back to Monett, Missouri, and my parents still lived there in Monett. That's where I started school, first grade, went all the way through school. My father became the superintendent of schools in 1965 and was there for almost 20 years and retired. And then he taught at Missouri State in Springfield in their graduate education department for a period of time. And my mother went back to school in 1964-65. We all took a year off and lived in Fayetteville. My father completed his year's residency for his doctor's degree, and my mother completed her undergraduate courses. When we left Fayetteville, they each lacked a couple of classes, and they finished those, and in January of 65 they both graduated. He got his doctor's degree, and Mother got her bachelor's degree in elementary education, and she became a school teacher. Title I migrant tutor is what she did in Monett until she retired. When I got out of law school, I made a conscious decision that I wanted to stay in Arkansas if I could at all. And then I made another decision that I wanted to stay in North Arkansas somewhere. And I considered either Rogers or Harrison, and decided I'd like to stay in Rogers. Growing up in Monett, Missouri, I'd been up and down the road many times and was very familiar with driving through Rogers and stopping here. I had some good friends from Rogers from college, and I liked the community. And so I wrote a letter of application to every law firm and attorney in Rogers, and got an appointment, went and sat down and interviewed and met all of them. And as a result of that, Oliver Adams hired me to go to work for him, and eventually we became law partners in Rogers. So the fact I ended up in Rogers, Arkansas was because of Oliver Adams.
So tell me about Oliver Adams. What was he like?
He was a wonderful man, parent, spouse, attorney. He became a true mentor of mine, taught me how to practice law in many ways, and taught me how to deal with people, how to deal with clients as an attorney. He had gone through Army ROTC, and at that time when he got out, he went to Vietnam. And his job in Vietnam was to fly as the passenger in a Cessna 150 with a spotlight. And when they shot at the airplane, the light he was shining, he radioed back the coordinates where the mortars ought to go. If you can imagine such a job as a second lieutenant, that's what he did. and that gives you some insight. When he came back, he started practice in Berryville, but moved to Rogers shortly after he started practice, and ran for prosecutor in what was then a 3-county district. Madison County was together with Carroll County and Benton County, and he ran against Farrell Faubus, the governor's son. Obviously Farrell was a Democrat, Oliver was a Republican, and he won. He was the first elected Republican prosecutor in Arkansas since Reconstruction. And he was reelected 2 times, I think, maybe 3. By the time he hired me, he had been out of the prosecutor's office for a couple years and was just in private practice. And after we had been law partners for 4 years, maybe 5, Governor Frank White appointed him to fill out a chancery judge's term. And then Oliver came back to our firm for a year, and then he ran for a chancery judge's position and won as a Republican. He was also the first chancellor elected as a Republican, certainly since Reconstruction in Arkansas. And he served as chancellor until he became ill and died in August of 2000.
Okay. So you started practice with him, and then what happened next?
Our practice grew. We hired associates and law clerks. I had some other partners. When he went on the bench, we'd already taken in a couple of other attorneys, Kim Lashley and Jim Lingle. And then we had some associates who worked in our office. And I practiced with them and with Bill Watkins until I came on the bench in 2001. I decided to run because I thought I would be able to do the job and do a good job, and that I would enjoy it, like it. When I was in practice, over the years, I had several attorneys and several clients talk to me about becoming a judge. And there were a couple of judges that would ask me to substitute for them when they were unavailable or had a conflict or were gone for some reason. And I did that from time to time, and I enjoyed it. And the situation arose that Governor Huckabee appointed me to fill out an unexpired term of Judge Huffman, who retired early before his term was up. And then after that, I ran for a different judicial position, and Robin Green and I ran for that position, and I won, barely, but I did win. She is now a circuit judge and does an excellent job. We are fortunate that all 7 of the circuit judges in Benton County are cooperative and assist each other and get along and work together well. It's one of the joys of my job now that I work with judges, that we are cooperative and help each other.
Is that not always the case in jurisdictions?
It is not. Sad to say, it's probably the exception across the state of Arkansas. My brothers and sisters across the state tell horror stories about judges in other districts not being able to get along or meet or cooperate or reach a consensus, and we have been. We have been pretty diligent, all of us, about discussions, meetings, decision making, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and being of one mind about what we're doing. So I am pleased that we are able to do that, as are our staffs. Our staffs all help each other in our cooperation.
What were some of the judges that were in here when you first came on the bench that you remember that maybe aren't around, that aren't here anymore?
Judge Enfield, our sitting circuit judge at the time, swore me in. I found out I passed the bar exam Sunday afternoon when Arkansas beat Notre Dame in the Final Four in 1978. At halftime, I called the Gazette and found out I had passed the bar exam. And I came over that next Monday morning and had asked Judge Enfield to swear me in, and he did. And I started practice that day. I practiced in front of him. And we also had a chancellor at that time, who became a federal judge, Judge J.L. Hendren, Jim Hendren. And I started practice in Chancery Court in front of Judge Hendren. And a lot of what he does and how he did it is how I've modeled my judicial operation. His docket was very similar to mine, what I have now, not totally, because Amendment 80 has changed the distinction between Chancery and Circuit Court, but a lot of what he did is what I do now. And I enjoyed very much trying cases in front of both Judge Enfield and Judge Hendren. They were the two primary judges, circuit judge, chancery judge, when I started practice, till we started expanding and getting some other judges. But they were the ones I started in front of, the two of them.
Any of the other judges that stand out over the years?
Oh yes, I had cases in front of Judge Crabtree, in front of Judge Keith and Judge Klinger. In my practice, as it developed, I traveled the state a lot, and I was not always in Benton County. I've pretty well covered the state one time or another in all parts, but those were some of the judges that I practiced in front of. And Judge Adams, eventually, when he went on the bench, I purposely, and he recused my cases for a year, so I was not in front of my old law partner just immediately, but eventually practiced in front of him, and I enjoyed that. I was very proud of that.
What about the prosecutors over the years that you remember? Well, I guess you were Chancery, so you didn't really have prosecutors. Not
much. Early in my career, I did a lot of criminal work in district court, municipal courts, what it was called then, with misdemeanors. First prosecutor I worked with was Gary Kennan, and one of his deputies was Kevin Pollock, and then Judge Klinger became prosecutor. And while I didn't have any felony clients involved, with the prosecutor, the deputies were people that I dealt with in municipal court.
Let's talk about Prosecutor Klinger. I've heard some stories about him. What would you say about Prosecutor Klinger?
Unbelievably thorough and detailed in his preparation of a presentation of a criminal prosecution to a jury. From time to time, some of the more well-known criminal trials, I might sit in and watch half a day or a couple of hours, but primarily from other attorneys who were criminal defense attorneys that dealt with him as a prosecutor, always talked about how meticulous, detailed, and prepared he was in his presentation of the criminal case to a jury. So I think that's what stood out the most to me, is what other people told me. He was equally prepared as a judge as he was when he was a prosecutor. I can remember one particular case. My lands, he knew as much about my client as I knew about my client when we got in there and got to trial. And I told my client that. I said, Judge Klinger is going to be prepared. He's going to know what's going on. Don't be messing up. Don't exaggerate. Talk straight. And he was. I think he is and was held in high regard as a judge by local attorneys. The type of cases that I hear has not changed. Since I went on the bench, I have always heard civil cases, domestic relations cases, and probate cases. Within those classifications, there has been some shifting over the years. We now have, I went on the bench in October of 2001, so I've been here coming up on 21 years. The number of paternity cases has increased. It seems to me, I don't have empirical numbers, but anecdotally it seems to me like the number of paternity cases has increased. I know that the number of guardianship cases where grandparents are raising grandchildren has increased over the years. People are not as conscious of the formal proceedings of a courtroom. from time to time I have to tell people to leave, go get some appropriate clothing on before they come back into court. Part of it is people tend to represent themselves. With the rise of the internet, there's all kind of access to legal documents and forms. A vast majority of my domestic relations docket is pro se litigants who are representing themselves. That has increased in the last 21 years.
So there's no one to tell them to wear a suit and tie? Or...
That's correct. Sure, there's no one to explain the Arkansas rules of civil procedure, the Arkansas rules of evidence to them. You know, you can just tell when you have deer in the headlights look. They have the idea they can just call up here and talk to the judge and explain their case and get the ruling they want. My staff is well versed in telling those people the judge is not going to talk to you or listen to you unless you're in the courtroom and everybody's there. When they start fussing about that, my staff explains, would you want him talking to the other side and listening to what the other side says without you being there? Well, that makes some sense to them. So I'm very much determined to conduct my hearings, rulings, activities in the courtroom, not in my office, not on the telephone, not over the email system.
Well, what's the most challenging part of your job?
When I have a child custody case and there's not a decent parent in sight and there's not a decent grandparent in sight, and I'm between a rock and a hard place to make a decision as to what is in the best interest of that child, where that child should live and under what circumstances that child should live. Those cases are very frustrating. I have to discipline myself not to become angry, not to become bitter, not to strike out at a parent that is a failure as a parent. Otherwise, a very competent, capable, able adult who can function. But for whatever reason, they're in a domestic relationship where they just can't bring themselves to do right by a child. And part of my job is education. Those people, I try to explain to them what's going to happen and what's not going to happen in that child's life. My favorite cases are the jury trials. I really enjoy them. I enjoy watching attorneys present their cases to the jury. I enjoy observing the jury during the trial. I have had several cases that involved $1 million verdicts, close to it, and that's real. You know, these people are serious. My experience with juries has really been interesting. When I started, most of the jurors were older than me. Now all of them are younger than me. But the jurors have been very attentive, very engaged, very sincere in their duty and want to do a good job. And as an example, I had a jury trial, and the first day we had the jury picked. They were in the box. We'd done opening statements. We took a lunch recess. During the recess, my court reporter came to me and said, my husband called and he's tested positive. I'm going home. Okay, packed her up, got her out of here. We got another substitute reporter from another judge able to fill in that afternoon. And I called the attorneys in, told them what had happened with my court reporter, who had had a mask on all morning and had not been particularly close to anyone from where she was sitting in the courtroom. But I told the attorneys, we had 12 jurors and one alternate, if we needed the alternate, said, I'm going to tell the jurors what's happened, and I'm going to tell any of them who want to leave, they're welcome to leave. No hard feelings, no questions asked. I'm going to let them leave if they want to leave. For whatever reason, they're uncomfortable because my court reporter's husband has tested positive, and obviously they'd been together that morning. And the attorneys agreed. They understood that. The jury came back from lunch. We put them in a jury box, and I explained to them what had happened. I said, you're free to leave if you want to. No hard feelings, no problems. I understand it. You're welcome to leave if you want to. I polled each one of those jurors individually, make a record of what they wanted to do or not to do. And Scott, every one of them, without any hesitation, without any lengthy thought, said, I'm going to stay. I'm going to finish. And I think it's because they felt committed to complete the process. They weren't going to let COVID scare them away or do anything other than their job. And we completed that trial. It took us a little over 2 days, but we did. And that's just an example of what my experience with jurors has been. Most cases, when I call a jury in, we start with 35 to get down to 12. And I have never, ever had a situation where all 35 didn't show up. Had a couple of them got sick, a couple of them I excused because of emergencies or whatever. But if I thought they were coming, they have all been here. My fellow judges across the state of Arkansas have told me horror stories about having trouble getting jurors to come to the courthouse. It has not been a problem in Benton County, and I think that speaks well of the citizens of Benton County. Sure, jury duty's an interruption, it's something different, you didn't plan on it, but everybody understands that's the system we've got. I might be the one who's involved in a trial sometime. I might need a jury. So they have all been very conscientious and followed directions very, very much. So I have never had a case where I thought the jury just double clutched and missed at all. I've had a few cases where the jury didn't award as many dollars in damages as I would if I were making the decision. A few where they've awarded more than I would have if I'd made the decision. But it hasn't been wildly different from what I've done. From time to time, I've gotten motions for a new trial or motions for J&OV, judgment notwithstanding the verdict, where some attorney wants me to increase the jury's award or reduce the jury's award, and I've never done that. I felt like the jury heard the evidence. Their decision certainly had basis, was understandable, and even though it might not have been exactly what I would have done, it was in the ballpark. And so I have always left the jury's verdict just where it was with that.
Before we finish, I want to be sure and ask you about some of the lawyers that, you know, some of the ones that come to court and have maybe memorable skills or just fun to listen to. I mean, who are some of the lawyers that stand out?
I always enjoyed watching Bobby Odom from Fayetteville try a personal injury case. I think he does a good job, did a good job. I was lucky enough to have Sid Davis represent some defendants in my court when I started on the bench, and I thought he did a good job in preparing a case and knowing what he was doing and trying his way around. I've had several cases lately involving land condemnations and a few other cases involving Glenn Kelly and Jason Wales, two young attorneys who do a good job. In the condemnation case, Glenn had his client hire a drone and flew a drone with a camera over the property being condemned. So, and showed that video to the jury to make them understand what real estate was being taken and what it meant, what it looked like, what it was. I thought that was pretty astute. Jason Wales was defending that action for the utility company, and he agreed. Video was accurate. He used it too. He said, you know, this is what it is. This is what's happening. And I appreciate very much most attorneys being honest and forthright and prepared to present their cases to the jury. I think most citizens do not appreciate the volume of litigation that all 7 of us deal with and the ramifications of that. All of us, except the criminal judges, criminal cases are a little bit different, but the civil and domestic relations and probate judges set anywhere from 10 to 15 cases a day. And some days you don't get done till 10 o'clock. Some days you're done at 2:30 in the afternoon. And you never know till you know. You've got to set those cases for trial in order for people to resolve their disputes and come to a resolution. The setting of those cases is a tremendous administrative burden for my staff, and keeping track of them and rescheduling them when we have to continue them for one reason or another. I had one case that involved a plaintiff who became ill and blamed a series of petrochemical manufacturers, sued about 13 different petrochemical manufacturers. And in that lawsuit, all of those defendants, the petrochemical manufacturers, had tall building lawyers from afar, and they had Arkansas counsel, so we had 2 attorneys for every defendant. My courtroom's one of the smaller ones we have. We were running out of room, and they wanted to get the matter set for trial, and I did. And all of those parties agreed that it was going to take a full month, 20 trial days of jury trial to try that lawsuit against those many defendants. So we had it set 2 years ago for next month, August 2022. And the end of June, they all settled that case, which for those parties is best. It's better if everybody comes to their own resolution without a jury telling them what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. But what that meant was the month of August on my docket was all of a sudden empty. And we had less than 1 month to tell somebody else, we've got time on the court's docket to hear your case, you all come on in here. You know, everyone else already had their schedules made. Litigants did, witnesses did, attorneys did. So my month of August is going to be pretty light because of that. And that happens in a smaller scale, certainly, over and over and over. The juggling of cases, continued cases, settled cases, tried cases, it is a big administrative hurdle that we have to get over to keep providing judicial services to the citizens of Benton County. And most people, if they're not in the judicial system, don't realize that sort of thing. When I first went on the bench, I had some personal friends who asked me what I did, how it was going, those kind of questions. I told them, come up here. I gave them a copy of my docket each day when they came up. Told them, sit in the courtroom, watch this. And they did. And of course, they had no idea that's how system worked and what it was and how many cases we had, and on and off the bench all day things were. Most litigants and most attorneys want to settle cases. They're more confident with the resolution they know than rolling the dice with whatever I decide or whatever a jury decides. But I do not order parties to mediation. I don't order settlement conferences. Sometimes in domestic relations cases, I require them to go to mediation before they file a petition asking for relief from the court. But most cases are settled, but they don't settle till they're set for trial. So we've got to get them set and keep the ball rolling in order to have closure and completion for those folks.
Back when you first started practicing law, do you remember before they had the public defender system? How did that work? Tell me about that.
Well, on criminal days, you didn't always want to be in Judge Enfield's court because he was looking for someone to appoint to represent an indigent criminal defendant. In Benton County, we were fortunate enough that we did have a public defender. Judge Keith was a public defender for a while, and Judge Huffman was also public defender for a while. So we did, but they frequently had conflicts of interest among criminal defendants where two or more people were charged with the same crime, doing it together, and so you had to have different attorneys for each one of the defendants. When I was in practice, I only had 2 felony clients in 24 years, and one of them was one that Judge Enfield appointed me to represent, and it was a wild ride. I had never had an experience like that before or since. When Judge Enfield called me and told me he wanted to appoint me, he told me that in Benton County, my client was charged with assault and battery, and in Boone County, in Harrison, they were charged with murder and attempted murder. It was a leader of a cult, a group of people thought the end was near, some isolationist sort of folks. Now, I didn't know all that at the time when I told Judge Enfield I'd be willing to take that appointment, but I learned it pretty quick. My client had a PhD in petroleum engineering from Texas A&M University. He was extremely intelligent. He could quote the Bible to me verse after verse after verse. And after I got appointed and realized what I'd gotten into, I talked to his attorney over in Boone County, and his attorney over there and I agreed that my assault and battery charge kind of paled compared to murder and attempted murder, and so they were going to try the case in Boone County first, and that's what they did. They were found guilty, convicted, and so the prosecutor in Benton County ended up dismissing those charges that I was. So I got my client an acquittal. Now, he still went to prison for life, but it wasn't the charge that I was defending. My other felony client was one of my regular business clients who wrote so many hot checks that Prosecutor Klinger charged him with a felony. So I represented my client in the felony criminal prosecution for hot checks in Arkansas. But those are my only 2 felony clients in 24 years that I had.
If someone came to you and said, who'd never been to Benton County, and they said, Judge, tell me about your new home county, what's it like? What would you tell them?
I'd tell them it's great. It's absolutely the best county in Arkansas to practice law in. In my practice, I filed a lawsuit in every county in Arkansas, either in circuit court or in what was then municipal court. And I had dealings with every one of those staffs, all those clerks, the sheriff to get my complaint and summons served on the defendant. And I never found a better place to practice law. Benton County, back when I started in '78, was small enough everybody knew everybody well. We didn't have electronic filing. Everybody came to the courthouse to file pleadings, handle their transactions, see the judges, to get something done. We used to have bar meetings set on default day because 90% of the attorneys in the county were already here, and you could talk to attorneys about various cases. Everybody talked with everybody else. It was a very collegial atmosphere, and it was fostered and nurtured by the attorneys. Everyone represented their clients and was vigorous and diligent in doing that. But everyone was respectful and civil, polite, courteous. It was just a good place to practice. The judges here did a good job. They worked. You knew you were going to get a trial. You knew the judge was going to be prepared. It was just a good experience to practice and work in Benton County, and I hope it still is. I believe it is. People tell me it is. Of course, I'm one of the sitting circuit judges. They're not going to tell me I'm doing something wrong, you know. But it is. I think it's a great place to practice law. The people here are hardworking, industrious, sincere, and are willing to build things, to build a community, build a society here in Benton County.
To complete this sentence, my favorite thing about Benton County is
the people. I've lived here since 77, and I've never regretted living here or raising my children here or seeing my grandchildren grow up here. It's a wonderful community. It's certainly been great to me. I hope that I have contributed and participated in some of its growth and development. It's just a lot of opportunity. I have said many times that anybody who wants to work can come to Benton County and get a job. If you don't have a job in Benton County, it's because you don't want one. There are just lots of opportunity for people who are ready to roll up their sleeves and go to work. And I hope that I've been part of that process. The community and the citizens here have just been wonderful.